Just a, just a little background about me before we head to the garden. 3 decades ago, I planted a meadow in my backyard, which we actually had a acre of lawn when we moved here. But I started a native wildflower meadow with also some grasses and a few shrubs. And that's how I started on my journey with native plants. And I really fell down the rabbit hole and have not come up yet. I certainly made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I learned so much in the process. I've never stopped growing native plants from seed, and we have less lawn each year on our acre property with an increasing variety of native species. So when the opportunity arose to pick the plant palette and layout for the pollinator garden in Mickleton Park, I felt ready for the challenge. This year completed the fourth growing season for this garden. In this photo, taken June 2nd, 2023, the pollinator garden was 1 year old. If you look to the right, you can see the environmental kiosk. In the foreground is lance leaf coreopsis in full bloom, and there's some penstemons in the background. So let me take you through the seasons and the species in the garden. But before that, let's start at the beginning. It's not, wait, my slide is not, wait, I'm not progress. Oh, there we go. Okay. The East Greenwich Environmental Commission obtained 2 grants for Mickleton Park in 2021. A $1,500 grant was for the plants and the plant tags in the pollinator garden. This was from ANJEC, the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions. The second grant for $10,000 was for the environmental kiosk, posters for the kiosk, and interpretive signs in the park. This grant was from NPSNJ Foundation Sustainable New Jersey. Here's one of the plant tags. A QR code, which is in the lower left-hand corner of the tag, brings you to a website that has information about each plant. I'm going to give you this website address at the end of the presentation so you don't have to take notes on all these plants. This is a sign at the entry to the park and the pollinator garden. It states, "This park is an evolving park that is in the process of being restored to a more natural state by the East Greenwich Environmental Commission and Green Team with assistance from the township's Public Works Department. As it evolves, additional native plants will be added, invasive species eliminated, and natural trails and areas established. Information at the kiosk will change throughout the year, so visit often to learn how you can become a good steward of the earth." This is the environmental information kiosk, which contains information on various environmental topics. The posters you can see are printed on vinyl scrim, which is resistant to fading. And the posters rotate in and out with seasonal environmental messages, and there's our spaces for 8 posters at one time. We also put up a section called What's Blooming Now, and we put photos with the names of what is currently blooming. So we constantly change this. And this is the interpretive sign at the pollinator garden. You can see it's summer because the purple coneflower is in full bloom. And it's asking you how many different kinds of pollinators you can spot in the garden. And there always seems to be a lot. So in the beginning, there was cardboard and lots of mulch. This was fall 2021. Planting was to begin the next spring. And this is the basic layout of the garden. It's 70 feet long, it's 32 feet at its widest, which is the left-hand side of the photo, and 17 feet at the narrowest. The shape of the beds was determined by Cindy Carolla, a certified landscape architect who was on the Environmental Commission. I then decided on plant palette and placement by laying the beds out on graph paper over the winter. And I placed the majority of plants on 12-inch centers and grasses on 18-inch centers. In general, I've intermixed 2 species together in groupings, except for the clump-forming perennials, which were set by themselves. I tried to surround the more aggressive species with grasses to limit their spread. But plants will often prove you wrong, and it turned out I was not always right in what I thought was aggressive, but more on that later. This site is in full sun with well-draining soil. So we planted 61 species of native plants representing 37 genera. The species were selected for drought tolerance and ones that would perform well in full sun. I tried to avoid including plants that are highly aggressive or labeled competitors. Most plants were planted from plugs because they're so cost effective. Plugs will often catch up to a larger potted plant in a single growing season. A few species, which are slower to get established, like blue false indigo, were purchased in gallon or quart pots. And since then, I've added a few annuals and perennials. These are our plant sources. They're all retail because we did not need a flat of any one species. With a few exceptions, most of the species were purchased in groups of 5, some of the grasses in groups of 10. A few species came from a pollinator sampler donation we received. About 11 species of plants were either taken from my garden or I started from seed. The reason for this was some species I was unable to find retail, and I'll mention these when we get to the species. And some I just had extras to spare, which saved money for other plants. So altogether, we started with about 300 plants. So the planting begins spring 2022. You can see we had a lot of mulch to move aside. Sometimes it felt like we were planting in little craters. Here, Liatris baccata is going in, and I was concerned about voles with the Liatris, but decided to take a chance. We cannot grow Liatris on our property, which is only a quarter mile away, due to voles. A year before we started this project, we were donated a pollinator sampler of 25 plants, which included 5 Liatris. The next year, none of them had come back, and there were little holes where they had been, so which means something ate the roots. So I figured that was voles. So I was a little worried, but nevertheless, I ordered 9 Liatris baccata plus another species of Liatris and kept my fingers crossed. Now, 4 years later, we still have them. I was amazed how quickly the plants would bloom from plugs. Here, less than 2 months after planting, Liatris baccata that you see was just being planted the month before, it's already blooming, as is the sundrops or narrow-leaf evening primrose, which is the yellow flower you see. Almost everything bloomed in the first year except for some of the species that were early spring bloomers, such as penstemon. Just a side note about watering. We generally do not add supplemental water to the garden except when the plants are first put in the ground. The first summer, the garden as a whole was only watered once in June. During extreme droughts, we do spot water if we see a species is suffering. Last summer, we didn't water at all. So here's the garden in August of that year. The mulch is still visible, but the plants are starting to fill in. And these are the species that are blooming. Since this is just the first year, many of the plants are not blooming at the time they would typically bloom. Now we're going to progress through the seasons with photos from the past 3 years, 23, 24, and 25. I'll be touching upon most of the species planted and in their season of bloom. Most of the landscape photos in this program will note the year the photo was taken. I've taken all the photos were taken by me. This photo is from early spring, which was late April to early May from the year 3, 2024. The Eastern Columbine was actually an afterthought. I did not put it in till the fall of 22, and that's when I realized we needed more ground covers. And it turned out to be a great ground cover. It stayed green all summer and into fall. And it was also a nice complement to the golden Alexanders. Originally, I thought Eastern Columbine wouldn't do well in full sun, but it proved me wrong. And here are close-ups of the 2 plants from the previous slide. Eastern Columbine is a nectar plant for hummingbirds, and its bloom coincides with the hummingbird migration to this area. And golden Alexanders are the host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. That's a native host plant for them. And I find their caterpillars on it every year, like this year on October 7th. This is one of 5 black swallowtail caterpillars I found on the golden Alexander, which really surprised me because I hadn't even noticed the butterfly, the black swallowtail butterfly in the garden that summer. So this plant provides a long season of ecological services to the garden from its first blooms in May to the foliage still present in October. So this photo is from the other end of the garden from the golden Alexanders. This is from the last week of April. Many plants haven't yet emerged, but the eastern blue star is blooming. Even though it is herbaceous perennial, it'll eventually become shrub-like, about 30 inches tall with an equal spread. But it is a slower grower and will take a number of years for it to fill the space allotted to it. In the meantime, lanceleaf coreopsis, which is the lighter green you can see in the photo, will help to fill the space. And blue false indigo is also planted in the same general area, but it's not even visible yet. So here's Eastern Blue Star, what it looks like when it's blooming, and it's a great source of nectar for bees, for early bees. And this is a threadleaf blue star that we also have in the garden, another species of Amsonia we have in the garden. And this is the Amsonia that you can find most commonly in the nursery trade, and it's known for its brilliant fall color, which you'll see later when we get to fall. This blooms in May, a little later than its cousin, the eastern blue star. And field pussy toes is a really early bloomer. This is one of the first plant flowers to bloom, and this was taken this year on April 5th. And we have two species of pussy toes in this garden. It's a great ground cover, and it's also the host for the American lady butterfly. This particular species of pussy toes will tolerate some shade, and it's the most petite of all the pussy toes. This is it at its full height of 8 to 10 inches. Isn't it just adorable? Now we get a late spring, so late May to early June. Blue false indigo and lanceleaf coreopsis are blooming here. The baptisia is past its peak, which is typically mid-May. These two make good companion plants because the baptisia is slower growing and the coreopsis is a short-lived perennial that readily reseeds and helps fill in the area. So here's a close-up of the two species. We purchased 3 blue false indigo as gallon plants because they are slow to mature. We've been very fortunate these plants have not succumbed to voles. In my property nearby, we've had to work hard at keeping this plant in the landscape due to voles who think the roots are very tasty. So we lose a lot of plants to voles in our yard. And there are 4 species of penstemon in the garden that begin blooming in late May. This is calico beard tongue, and it's 3 to 4 feet high and is very similar to foxglove beard tongue, but is pink instead of white. And here's foxglove beard tongue. Both these penstemon are short-lived perennials, but will readily reseed if bare ground is available. They do best on the edge of a garden. Otherwise, they can be outcompeted by more aggressive natives. And we planted along an aisle. So all the penstemon gets lots of bumblebee visits. This penstemon, hairy beard tongue, is shorter at only 18 inches tall, and it will take quite a bit of shade, but it also will tolerate full sun. The common name is due to its hairy stems, and it's extremely drought tolerant. Penstemon smallii is the 4th species of penstemon in the garden, and it's one of my favorites. It's a good penstemon for shade, but will also tolerate sun. I plant it where the kiosk offers a little bit of shade for part of the day. It's also only about 18 inches tall, but the foliage is a beautiful lime green, and it's more predominant than the foliage than some of the other beard tongues in the garden. And it makes a really great cut flower, too. Penstemon smallii is not native to New Jersey, but to a few states in the South, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. But it does great here in New Jersey. It is also relatively short-lived like the other penstemons, but it also readily recedes. New Jersey tea is one of the 2 shrubs in the garden. It blooms late May or early June. It grows to about 3 feet high and wide. And these shrubs are in the same area that the Eastern Columbine and Golden Alexander was in the earlier photo. Those blooms have now waned. And if you look closely on the left-hand side, you can see the seed heads of the previous year's Eastern Columbine. Here's a photo of the New Jersey tea from this year, 2025. So you can see it's still thriving in its 4th year. The fading flowers and the seed heads of the golden Alexanders are visible in the foreground, and these 2 make really good companion plants. We originally planted 4 species of milkweed in the garden. We have lost one of them, but more on that later. You'll find out. Purple milkweed, that was the first of the milkweeds to bloom, and if I had to pick a favorite, this would be it. Purple milkweed can be finicky, but if it finds a happy place, it can really thrive. It is on the New Jersey endangered list as an S3 classification, meaning it is vulnerable and has a moderate risk of extinction. It doesn't always form seed heads, or if it does, the seeds are not always viable. And that is probably one of the reasons it is endangered, besides loss of habitat. So please consider adding it to your garden. Like this year, it didn't make any seed heads this year, though it had on some other years. And in my garden, it's hit or miss. Some years it has seed heads and sometimes it doesn't. So butterfly weed, which you're probably all familiar with, is a long-lived, very drought-tolerant milkweed. It's only about 18 inches high, and it's doing well in the garden and reseeding some. Another late spring bloomer is this threadleaf chickseed cultivar Zagreb. It's very well behaved, about 18 to 24 inches high, and skipper butterflies just love this plant. So now we're moving on to summer. This photo is from 2023, the second summer of the garden. And the garden is filling in, and the plants are still behaving and for the most part staying within their original boundaries. And here are the name of some of the species that you see flowering. We'll be visiting each of these plants for a closer look in future slides. Here's another photo from year 2 showing some of the same plants from a slightly different angle. Now we go to year 4, this past summer. Notice there's more intermingling of species and a slightly wilder look, which I happen to like. And these are some of the species you are seeing in bloom. The haze of yellow on the right, in the right center is yellow wild indigo, but it's just finishing its bloom here. But above it is the hoary skullcap, Scutellary and Canna. These are great plants to grow together. And you can see the purple coneflower is blooming, and there's some liatris blooming in there also. This photo is from a different angle the same year, but take note of the very back, where if you look closely, you'll see the yellow of one of the native sunflowers in the very back right. And in the middle, back middle, you can see the architectural rattlesnake master. We'll be zooming in there for a closer look after the next slide, just to give you some perspective of the garden. So here we're zooming in a little to see the intermingling of some of the species from this past summer. And here are the species that you are seeing. And we'll be visiting all of these soon. So now we head to the far end of the garden, which you had a glimpse of in the earlier slide. This is where some of the taller plants in the garden live. Remember, it's still summer. And here's some of the species you see in bloom. In the very back middle, there's Amsonia hebrichtii, which had bloomed in May, but you can see its foliage. So now let's zoom in and meet some of these plants. Yellow wild indigo is in the same genus as Baptisia as blue false indigo. It blooms later, though, and is a little shorter. It's extremely drought tolerant. And the photo on the right is from this year when the garden is a little more filled in, and it really just seems to glow in this section of the garden. And here is a close-up of the pea-like flower. And we planted 2 different species of liatris in the garden. Remember, I told you they're still there. And liatris spicata on the left is actually interplanted with hyssop leaf boneset, which isn't blooming yet, but it's very visible. If you look in the right-hand corner, that left photo, that's the hyssop leaf, the buds of hyssop leaf boneset. In the background of the liatris spicata is one of the narrowleaf mountain mint in bloom. So on the right is Savannah blazing star, and we planted it with rattlesnake master. The rattlesnake master is quite a bit taller than this blazing star, but they seem to work well together. Savannah blazing star is about 2 to 4 feet in height. So narrowleaf mountain mint is one of the 2 species of mountain mint in the garden. This one's very well behaved with a shorter stature than some of the other mountain mints and it's only about 2 to 2.5 feet tall. The mountain mints are clump forming and very easy to pull out if they go out of bounds. It's a wonderful pollinator plant. The mountain mints are not nearly as aggressive as the culinary mints, and this particular species I find actually less aggressive than some of the other mountain mints. And here's a close-up of the flower with the soldier beetle. Purple coneflower blooms have a very long seasonal presence in the garden, and they're spreading nicely by self-sowing. The flowers will open gradually over a long period of time, and I was surprised to find some opening earlier this month, which was early November, when most of them were going to seed, but here were some new ones starting to bloom. So it's a very long season of bloom, and they're about 4 feet tall in the garden. We put this purple coneflower cultivar, powwow wild berry, in at the entrance to the garden. It has a much shorter stature at only 18 to 24 inches high and a deeper pink color. This is what the cultivar looked like in relation to the kiosk for the first 2 years. Now, on the right is a photo from year 4. I believe it's self-sowed and hybridized with the straight species, which is in the other areas of the garden. So this is now taller and deeper pink. than it's taller than the cultivar and deeper pink than the cultivar, but the height of the straight species. So hoary skullcap is an incredibly versatile native in the mint family and one of my favorite native plants. I don't know why the nursery trade seems to have overlooked this plant. It will tolerate full sun to full shade and bloom beautifully in both situations because I have it in full shade in my yard, and it just blooms just as well, maybe a little bit later. It's very drought tolerant and long lived. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall. It will spread by runners as well as seed. But it wasn't until this year that some editing was required, and I was able to actually dig some up and share the plant with volunteers. It's a great companion plant with yellow. You can see it on the left here with yellow wild indigo. And in the right photo, you can see some yellow St. John's wort and also the pink of the Monarda fistulosa. So it's a great companion plant for those other plants. So shrubby St. John's wort is the other shrub we planted in the garden. It's a beautiful shrub growing 4 to 5 feet tall, but it is actually listed as endangered in the state of New Jersey with an S1 status, which means critically imperiled, which I find very surprising because in my garden meadow, a short distance away, it is far from being endangered and it has spread just like its Latin name suggests, prolifically. So I did have to think twice before including it in this garden, but I've only had to yank out a few seedlings so far. And the flowers are so full of pollen, and and many frenzied bees visit it in the summer when it blooms. Monarda fistulosa can be aggressive in the garden, so it's not always suitable for a very small garden. But so far, this cultivar seems to be less aggressive and has not spread in this garden. And this plant came from a pollinator sampler donation. So spotted bee balm is the second species of Monarda in the garden. And another common name is dotted horsemint. It can vary in height up to 3 feet, but for the most part in this garden, it's about 2 feet tall. It's extremely drought tolerant. It reseeds regularly, but not aggressively. It's great at filling in areas. It has a very complex architecture. The pink that you see are not the flowers, actually, but are colorful leaf-like structures which surround the plant's true flowers, just like the bracts of a poinsettia. So it's a great pollinator plant, especially for wasps. Hoary vervain is another one of my favorites. It's a wonderful pollinator plant and extremely drought tolerant. It can suffer, though, from too much competition. Each individual plant may be short-lived and needs to be able to reseed, which happily it has been doing in this garden in the past 4 years. It attracts a variety of pollinators from butterflies to bees. This is one that I had to start from seed as I was unable to find it in the nursery trade. Another species, Verbena histata, is easier to find, but it requires more moisture than this verbena, so it wasn't a candidate for this garden. Here's another photo of the hoary vervain in the garden, but I'm using it to transition to the next plant we're going to visit. So look behind the hoary vervain, you'll notice a white cloud of flowers, and see if you can guess what it is. I'll zoom in on it. So here it is in focus. Of course, it is another one of my favorites. By now, you know I have quite a few. So if you haven't guessed yet, it is flowering spurge, Euphorbia correlata. It's a very long-blooming and long-lived, extremely drought-tolerant plant. There is nothing that I know of not to like about this plant. Though it's very hard to find in the nursery trade. I've read it may not do well with pot culture, so maybe this is why. Fortunately, it is very easy to start from seed, and I have had success transplanting it. The white petal-like structures are not petals at all, but bracts which surround the true flowers. And it has latex sap like other euphorbias, so herbivores tend to leave it alone. It is another underused native plant. It is self-sowing nicely in the pollinator garden, but not aggressively. And here's a close-up photo of a skipper butterfly on it this summer. The little flowers are really adorable. It's a great companion plant to purple coneflower, which is about the same height, about 3 to 4 feet. And as if the bountiful flowers in the summer were not enough, it continues its show into the fall. By September, the flowers are gone, but replaced by red stems and this beautiful foliage. Isn't that stunning? Anise hyssop is another short-lived perennial which can reliably self-seed if there's some bare ground. It is very long blooming and a popular pollinator plant, 2 to 4 feet high. The leaves have an anise scent when they are brushed up against. And if you look closely, you can see there's lots of little skipper butterflies on this plant. So this is a cultivar of Phlox paniculata, Jenna, and it was originally found in nature growing in Nashville, Tennessee. When Mount Cuba Center did their phlox trials, this plant had the most pollinator visits out of all their phlox. Here's the phlox again behind one of the mountain mints, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we're going to get to it now. So hoary mountain mint is the second species of mountain mint in the garden. It has a subtle but beautiful color. So if you look at that inset there, you can see the little lavender flowers, which are up against the gray-green foliage. It grows to about 3 feet high, so a little taller than the narrowleaf mountain mint. It's an excellent pollinator plant with an extremely long bloom time. It can bloom from late June into October. You can also see rattlesnake master in the same area in this photo in the background. The world milkweed is another milkweed species in the garden, generally blooming later than the others. It's not competing very well, though, in this garden. The asters seem to be outcompeting it because there's some asters nearby, and it's migrating to the aisles. It's endangered in New Jersey with Nest 2 status, but it's not endangered in the U.S. as a whole, where in some areas it is very prevalent. So it's less than 2 feet high, and monarchs have laid eggs on all 4 species that we have planted in this garden. 4 species of milkweed that we've planted in this garden. So nodding onion is one of our native onions, and it needs some management to keep in the garden too. We've been losing some of this. This also has competitions from the asters reseeding, which are nearby. So brings us to the taller section of the pollinator garden where plants are about 5 feet in height. The false sunflower here is a butterfly magnet. It spreads readily from seed dispersal and also through the roots. And here's a close-up of it with the skipper butterfly on the flower. So this is Vernonia glauca, upland ironweed. I chose upland ironweed for this garden, even though I had no experience with it, because it's supposed to tolerate drier soils than New York ironweed. I have New York ironweed at home, and it does great in a dry, sandy soil with no supplemental watering and reseeds regularly. But out of 5 plants, only 1 upland ironweed remained this year. Several years ago, when I noticed we were losing some, I collected seed, and when they came up, interestingly, half the seedlings did not resemble upland ironweed. At the same time, some ironweeds were self-sowing in the garden, but they were definitely also not upland ironweed. So I was very perplexed. So we have one other species of ironweed in the garden, and it is iron butterfly, which is a cultivar of Vernonia littlemanii. So the seedlings that were coming up had narrower leaves than the upland ironweed, but wider than iron butterfly. And the height was in between the 2 plants. So I eventually realized this was a cross between Vernonia littlemanii iron butterfly and upland ironweed. And when I looked into it, I found that ironweeds are very promiscuous and different species will readily cross-pollinate with each other. So I let 2 of these that cross-pollinated remain in the garden, and they are actually excellent at attracting pollinators. And here's a photo of one of the crosses that came up. It's actually very attractive, and so I'm going to allow a few to stay in the garden. And here's a close-up of the upland ironweed, which is surrounded by the false sunflower, which you can see in the photo. And the reason we're losing it may be that the false sunflower is outcompeting it, because the false sunflower, it just sets seedlings like a carpet all around it. So rattlesnake master is a great architectural plant for the garden. It's one of the tallest plants in the garden, and pollinators love it. And it is self-sowing lightly, which I was happy to find. And here's a close-up of its unusual flower. So this photo shows just how pretty it is with the phlox and the mountain mint. They make great companion plants. And if you look closely in the foreground, just to the right of center, is little blue stem. And so this is going to transition us to the grasses we planted. So we planted 7 graminoids initially in the garden, 5 grasses and 2 sedges. The sedges bloom in the spring, but the grasses bloom that we planted bloom in the summer, so we'll talk about them now. The photo on the left is little blue stem with the seedling of rattlesnake master. That's a self-sown seedling. And on the right, the little blue stem is starting to set up its inflorescence. It is a warm season bunch grass, meaning it sets seeds in the summer. The foliage is only about 2 feet in height, but when it flowers, it goes up to 4 feet. And it's a perennial like all the grasses that we planted. The little blue stem is very drought tolerant and will handle many different soil types. It also tolerates high heat and humidity, which we have been having a lot of lately. So this is what the flower of little blue stem looks like in the summer. And here's little blue stem going to seed on September 15th of this year. You can see the aromatic aster behind it is just starting to bloom. And little blue stem is the larval host for some of the skipper butterflies. Prairie dropseed is a clumping warm season grass for full sun and well-drained soils. Its foliage is about 15 inches tall, but the seed heads can rise up to 3 feet. It's very slow growing from seed and even a plug, and it takes several years to mature. Every one we planted is doing great here, but it's not self-sowing, and I did read that it does not self-sow well in gardens. And here's what the seed head looks like on the right. Side oats grama is another warm season clumping grass we planted. It's 1 to 3 feet in height, but the foliage is not as attractive as that of little blue stem and the prairie dropseed. It kind of looks to me like it's having a bad hair day. But this is a reason we have it, because the reddish purple flowers you see make up for the foliage. I think they're beautiful, and it performs best in full sun and is very drought tolerant. So blue grama grass is one of the shortest of the native ornamental grasses. It's known for its beautiful seed heads that kind of look like eyelashes. The foliage is only about 4 inches tall, and when in flower, about 15 inches. It's another drought-tolerant, clumping, warm season grass. It still has a presence in the garden, but it's not competing as well with some of the other grasses, and that's probably because of its short stature. So here are the seed heads of the switchgrass cultivar Shenandoah that we planted. This is another clump forming warm season grass. This grows to about 4 feet in height. Unfortunately, it has been underperforming in the garden and has been susceptible to rust, so I'm thinking about replacing it with another panicum. Now we come to the sedges. I originally planted 2 sedges, Carex appalachia and Carex rosea. The Appalachian sedge is doing very well in the garden, even though this sedge typically performs best in part shade. The Carex rosea, or curly wood sedge, which is not in this photo, is not faring as well. It is in an area where there's more competition from asters. So you can see this is a continuing theme. These asters really like to compete. Anyway, as an experiment, I planted 2 Carex bromoides. This was maybe the 3rd year, I think, of the garden, along an edge where I was hoping some shade from the taller plants might allow it to survive. And so far it is. This sedge normally does best in shady, moist soils. But here it is last spring when in flower, and the brown blades you see are from the previous year's growth. It's not that it's drying out. This fall, I just added some more Appalachian sedge I started from seed to the borders of the garden. So now it's fall in the garden, and here's some of the colors you see in early fall. This is probably actually early September, and this is year 3, 2024. And here's some of the species that you see in bloom. There's showy goldenrod, orange coneflower, iron butterfly, ironweed, and sweet everlasting. And here's another photo from year 3, looking in the other direction, where you can see the asters are in bloom. The aromatic asters on the right, and the New England aster is in the back left. So we're turning around again in the garden, but this is year 4, last fall. The New England aster that you saw in the back is now in the right foreground. And here is what you see blooming. And also I have New Jersey tea labeled because it's not blooming. It bloomed in late May, early June, but you can see the foliage is still there. So now let's go meet some of these species. We have 3 species of goldenrod in the garden. Goldenrods are very important plants for the fall garden. They sustain migrating butterflies and other pollinators late in the fall when there's not a lot in bloom. And they are host to over 100 caterpillars, which translates to a lot of bird food. This is showy goldenrod. It lives up to its name. It absolutely looks electric in the garden. I love when it blooms. It is actually named showy, I found out, because the flowers are a little larger than the typical goldenrod flower. And the planting of this goldenrod was actually unintentional because but it turns out it's one of my favorites. It happened when one of the goldenrod cultivars I purchased was mislabeled. And it took me a while to realize what it was, and it turned out it was showy goldenrod. This is a fairly early blooming goldenrod. It starts late summer. It's 4 to 5 feet tall, but it can be cut back or Chelsea chopped earlier in the season to reduce the height. It's not as aggressive as some of the goldenrods, but it will reseed if there's bare ground, and it can spread very slowly through rhizomes if the conditions are right. Whoops. Okay, here in the inset shows how popular this goldenrod is with scoliid wasps. These wasps are not aggressive and rarely sting unless stepped on or handled carelessly. This is the only straight species of goldenrod in the garden. The other 2 we planted are cultivars with the expectation that the cultivars would be a little less likely to spread. This is a very popular cultivar fireworks, which you're probably familiar with. This cultivar was selected from a population on North Carolina's coastal plain. It grows from 4 to 5 feet tall, but you can also do the Chelsea chop on this to keep it shorter, which means cut it back maybe halfway in June at the time of the Chelsea flower show. So it makes a stunning display. And it really does look like little fireworks are going off like in the sky. Here's a close-up of fireworks and New England aster. These 2 make terrific companion plants. Here's another goldenrod cultivar. It's called Golden Fleece. It's only about 18 inches high. In my experience, it only spreads relatively slowly through underground rhizomes. It is shorter than the other goldenrods in the garden, so it makes a great edging plant. This cultivar is a Mount Cuba Center introduction. It was found as a spontaneous seedling growing in North Carolina. So now we come to the asters. There's 4 species of common asters in the garden representing the genera Symphyotrichum and Eurybia. Smooth blue aster is a really lovely aster. It's called smooth blue aster because the leaves and stems are smooth. But because they're smooth, herbivores love to eat it. But fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, it readily self-sows. It initially held the record for volunteers in this garden. Some other species are now catching up. And this is why we were losing some of the species that I had mentioned that we had planted near the asters. Anyway, it can grow to at least 4 feet in height, but it can be cut back earlier in the season to suppress its height. This is showy aster, and I think it really lives up to its name. The flowers are a little larger than some of the other asters, and the color is very vibrant. It is only about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. It will spread through underground roots to fill an area, so it makes a great ground cover. It is not spread to other areas of the garden like some of the other asters. And it's not aggressive. It's really just staying in its area. I think I've only seen one of these come up somewhere else, and it was actually only like a couple feet away. So and this aster is particularly native to the coastal plain of New Jersey and then other states along the coast of the US. New England aster is the tallest aster in the garden at 5 to 6 feet, but it can be cut back twice earlier in the season to reduce its height. The ones I have planted near the house, I cut back in May around Memorial Day and then again around 4th of July, but we don't cut it back in this garden. And it is one of the earlier asters to bloom. If it's not cut back, it can start blooming as in early August. And here it is with the false sunflower in the taller section of the garden. Here's our 4th and very last aster to bloom in the garden, the aromatic aster. It's a really prolific bloomer and very popular with pollinators. It's about 3.5 feet tall, sometimes 4, but it can also be chopped back to make it shorter, which we don't need to do in this garden, of course. But it is called aromatic because of the foliage. It's not the flowers that's aromatic, it's the foliage that smell herbal when crushed. And for this reason, it's not popular with deer or rabbits. So both the straight species and a cultivar are in this garden. The cultivar, Raiden's favorite, blooms later, October into November, whereas the straight species, starts blooming in September. So having both of these in the garden really extends the bloom season. And aromatic aster is such a butterfly magnet in the fall because there's not a whole lot blooming when this is blooming. Here's the red admiral on the left and the American copper on the right. Now, the mass of white you see in the center here is an annual sweet everlasting, which blooms in the fall with the asters. In this photo, the aromatic asters in the foreground, and the New England aster is in the background. And there's also some orange coneflower coming up in the sweet everlasting. This is an annual that's native to New Jersey, which just happened to show up on my property. So I transplanted some to this garden, and it just self-sows here every year, and it's great for filling in areas. And a bonus is that's one of the hosts for the American lady butterfly. Just like I said, the pussy toes were. This grows up to 3 feet tall and sometimes 4 feet in height. And here's a close-up of the flower just before it opens, which is if you pick it at this time, it's great for drying. And I use a lot of these in arrangements in the fall. So here's more Maryland golden aster, and it's a wonderful late summer, early fall bloomer, and it is extremely drought tolerant. It's very well behaved, short and tidy at 18 to 20 inches tall, and butterflies love it. It gets visited a lot by variegated fritillaries, which you see here in the right photo. It's been performing very well so far in the garden, and it does self-sow some. And the purple you see there on the left is the smooth blue aster. So here is the photo, a photo of the Maryland golden aster in the middle of September last year, 2024. And there's a close-up of the flower on the right. Rudbeckia fulgida, or orange coneflower, is very long blooming. It looks similar to Rudbeckia hirta, which is commonly planted, but this is longer lived than the black-eyed Susan or Rudbeckia hirta. That is shorter lived perennial. And here we're zooming in on the flowers of the orange coneflower. Say another fall bloomer is this boneset, hyssop leaf boneset, also called hyssop leaf thoroughwort. It's very drought tolerant, only about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, has a clumping habit, and does reseed some. I interplanted it with Liatris spicata, and if you look closely, you can see some of the seed heads here of the Liatris. The yellow on the right is the Maryland golden aster, and there's some smooth blue aster, and they're also visible in the photo. So here we are in the middle of October of this year. I just love the muted colors and textures of the garden. In October, the majority of the plants now have gone to seed. But if you look at the back, just left of center, there's something blooming at the far end. You can kind of see a purple haze or a lavender haze. This is aromatic aster, Raiden's favorite, which remember I said blooms later than the straight species. And here it is, blooming the middle of October after the majority of the garden is in senescence. This cultivar is thought to be originally found in Tennessee. It blooms about 3 weeks later than the straight species and blooms into November. There's some blanket flower in here also, Giardia pucella, which it's an annual I started from seed to just fill in some and extend the bloom in the garden, and it will bloom until frost. The straight species of this aromatic aster is actually planted at the other end of the garden. Here's the end of October, and you can see the Amsonia hubrichtii. Looks like it's on fire. So you're looking through the brown seed heads of rattlesnake master. I think this is just stunning in the fall. And here's just another photo because I think it's just so. I had to include another one because it's so pretty. And here's winter. We don't remove any of the seed heads or growth. In the spring or summer, we may break off some of the higher stems partway down because these stems then can provide a cavity for some of the native stem nesting bees. But often we just let the new foliage grow up to cover the old stems. So we have lost 3 species so far in the life of this garden. The narrow leaf primrose was the first to go, only lasting the first season. I had almost decided not to use it in the garden because of its reputation of being aggressive. It turned out smooth blue aster was even more aggressive. Who knew? Monarda didyma, or scarlet bee balm, did not fare so well in the garden also. It didn't do well it actually did well, very well the first season. We had it the second season, but during the extreme droughts, it needed some supplemental water. So I think it's between the droughts and being in full sun, and also it's near the edge of the garden, and there was sheep sorrel was creeping into the garden, which has similar roots as the bee balm. So I'm sure we weeded some out. And it did last 2 years, but my home garden, a quarter mile away, it's persisted for decades with no supplemental water, but I had it planted in part shade. So I think a lot of it that it was in just full sun, baking sun. And I really resisted giving up on swamp milkweed and even tried replanting it, but the plants often just did not return and eventually disappeared. It is a short-lived perennial, and despite its name, swamp is in its name, but drought does not seem to affect it in my home garden where it's persisting but not spreading, though. It was doing some self-sowing in the first several years, even though we were losing some of the original plants, but then it totally disappeared. So we did have a big problem with oleander aphids on it, though, every year. So I now have officially given up on it, unfortunately. And these are the plants that are my top spreaders. So if you come visit the garden, you may have a chance to take some of these home with you. So smooth blue aster, aromatic aster, false sunflower. Now these are all great plants. So if you come, I'd be glad to give you some, and they're wonderful. And I would, if I did this all over again, I would still plant them regardless of how they spread. And showy goldenrod, this one has spread a little less than the aforementioned plants, but then again, I only did start out with one plant. And honorable mention goes to the hoary skullcap, which really didn't start spreading till this year. But this is another one I have been able to dig up and give away to volunteers. Notice there's no mountain mint on this list. That was a surprise to me too. Hoary mountain mint has barely reseeded at all so far, and spreading by roots is impeded by the grasses planted around it, I guess. So there are some plants I put in during the second or third season after realizing we could use some more ground cover or matrix plantings. And these are 2 that I put in, and they seem to be holding their own in the garden. I started starry cerasium from seed from Toadshade Wildflower Farm. It starts blooming in early April, so the same time as the pussy toes. And there was nothing else in bloom at that time except for starry cerasium and pussy toes. So it's planted along the edges as it is a very short ground cover. And American alum root has proved to be very drought tolerant and sun tolerant, though it is shaded somewhat by the plants around it. And some of these I planted along an edge, some I planted like in the interior, and the ones I planted in the interior, I completely kind of lost where they were because all the plants coming up around them. So when I first put these in, I was watering them some to get them established because planting them in the summer. Then I lost them and they never got watered again. And then when the next year, I saw that they were still there, so I was thrilled. So I think they're pretty drought tolerant. And I'll continue to add some plants, particularly to the border or to the ground layer. So if you plant it, they will come. I have identified 21 species of butterflies in the garden over the past 4 years. Here's variegated fritillary on aromatic aster. Here's fiery skipper on showy aster. Common buckeye butterfly and aromatic aster. Orange sulfur butterfly on New England aster and false sunflower. Eastern tiger swallowtail on swamp milkweed and spice bush swallowtail on the garden phlox. Variegated fritillary on purple coneflower and world milkweed. American lady butterfly on anise hyssop. Painted lady butterfly on purple milkweed. silver-spotted skipper, and Horace's dusky wing skipper on Hoary Vervain. Red Admiral on Boneset, and Monarch on aromatic aster. And here's a summer azure ovipositing on New Jersey tea, which happens to be one of its host plants. Gray hair streak on sweet everlasting. And then, of course, if we have caterpillars, as long as there are host plants for the butterflies to lay their eggs on, like this purple milkweed with the monarch caterpillar, or three of them, which I didn't even discover until I looked at the photograph. I hadn't realized that there were two smaller ones underneath the leaf when I was taking the photo. And some of the monarch caterpillars formed chrysalises on the kiosk one year. Black swallowtail caterpillar on the golden Alexander, which is its native host plant. And this is the nest or hibernaculum of the American lady butterfly on sweet everlasting. If you see webby stuff or what looks like flowers kind of glued together on sweet everlasting or pussy toes, this is evidence that there may be an American lady caterpillar inside. It hides inside in the daytime to avoid predators and comes out at night to feed. If you look inside this nest, this is the caterpillar you will find. And this is the butterfly, the American lady butterfly. And as I said, the pussy toes are another host for this butterfly. And this woolly bear caterpillar is on iron butterfly ironweed, and this is a generalist caterpillar, meaning it'll feed on a variety of plants. I'm not sure if it was feeding on this ironweed, but that's where I found it. And then there are the birds, which feast on the seed heads, which of course we leave standing. This is a female goldfinch on purple coneflower seed heads. And this is the website. If you go to this website, this will bring you to the information that the plant QR codes will bring you to on those plant labels I showed you. So you can take a screenshot of this or write this down. There are a few plants on this website that are not, that there are few plants in the garden that are not on this website, such as the showy goldenrod, which I didn't have in the original plans. So there are several other projects ongoing in this park. So I'm going to go over these now quickly. One is a restoration area where we're in the process of removing invasives and planting natives. This is a wetter area and with some shade, so enabled us to select an entirely different plant palette. Planting here began in spring of 24. This is a photo of Sweet Bay Magnolia taken in July of this year with the black willow in the background. And this black willow has just taken off because it was way smaller than that when we put it in. And this is a photo of the narrow leaf or swamp sunflower that was taken this September. We planted these in 24 and we put in 50 plugs, and I think every single one of them survived and spread. And here it's not even in full bloom, but it was really a stunning display. And I think this is really helping to keep the invasives out of this section. Anyway, only a small portion of this area has been tackled so far. So this is our soft landings project enabled through a grant from NPSNJ this past spring. There are 7 beds placed under trees, and planting began in May and continued over the course of the summer. This is the largest bed, and there is 1 river birch and 1 oak in this bed, which are both keystone plants. These are areas where insects can overwinter without being disturbed. This photo is from August, and this photo was taken in September, and it's a close-up of a whitewood aster and wreath goldenrod in this same bed, which are now in bloom, and they were just planted maybe two or 3 months before from little plugs. And you can see some leaves of the eastern columbine peeking through. So there are flowers that will also bloom here in the spring and some in the summer. The last 2 grants the commission obtained were for a new portion of the park. This gazebo is an environmental reading center housing over 100 environmentally themed children's books. It just had its ribbon cutting last month. And here's a close-up of the sign for the reading center. And this photograph was actually from the Pollinator Garden, the Mickleton Park Pollinator Garden. And the other grant for this park was to plant a wooded buffer zone. We planted over 100 trees plus understory sedges and native wildflowers. So please come visit us. The Pollinator Garden is on Democrat Road in Mickleton. The address is 49 Democrat Road. and we are located near exit 16 on Route 295. The newest section of the park is not yet accessible from that parking lot on Democrat, but there is a parking lot off a Quaker Road nearby for this part of the park, and these two sections will eventually be connected by a walking path. So thank you for your virtual visit to the Mickleton Park Pollinator Garden. Maybe next time you can come down in person. And now I'll be glad to take questions.
Lucy, that was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I'm glad you threw in a few of those things at the end because I was going to say before we even get to questions, like the pollinator garden is just one small part of all the things you're doing in that whole Mickleton Park.
Yep, there's a lot going on.
A lot going on. And the that was the nature pavilion, but then there's the pavilion at the pollinator garden that has all kind of literature in it. So
Yes.
when people go there, they don't just look at the pretty flowers, but they can learn a lot. There's a lot of literature there, and everything's labeled.
Yeah, there's lots of handouts. When I took that picture that was of the kiosk, that was before we had put up little, what are they called, Bruce? Just little,
Distribution
little
boxes.
distribution boxes for handouts. Some of them are from the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, but we have lots of handouts. Preserve Society and
Very nice, and that you get a lot of support from your township, right?
yes, yes, they're appreciative. They definitely, yes, they definitely are supportive.
So a couple of people asked about deer. You never mentioned
I knew that was going to be a question. I'm
you
ready.
never
Well,
mentioned the problem with
there are deer, but there's not a lot of deer. On our property, we have never had deer, and we're nearby, but we're on a major road. Deer have been sighted in the park, and there has been some deer browse on some of the trees and in the restoration area. You know, some of the swamp milkweed was getting eaten, but there's so much of that. The deer have never eaten anything in the pollinator garden. Neither have rabbits, even that I've noticed, even though there's a rabbit living in there one summer. But also a lot of the plants that we've planted, not all of them, but there's a lot that are actually deer resistant. Like the verbena, the hoary vervain, the verbena stricta, it's a bitter foliage. The Forbia correlata, which I mentioned, has that milky sap that's toxic. The ironweed has bitter foliage. The monardas are in the mint family, and they have aromatic foliage, which really isn't desired by deer. I'm sure if the deer are really hungry, they'll eat just about anything. The aromatic aster also has fragrant foliage. There and the showy goldenrod, supposedly they're not crazy about, though they do like some of the other goldenrods. And the Scutellaria in Canada, the hoary skullcap, is bitter tasting. Rattlesnake master they don't like because of the bristly, spiny leaves. And Amsonia has a milky, bitter sap. So there's a lot of plants in there, and a lot of these plants are along the edge too. And yeah, we have not yet, anyway, fingers crossed. It doesn't mean it may not happen one year, but because there are warehouses going down the street, so the deer definitely have less, space, and more may come to the park in the future. But so far, we've been really lucky.
and speaking of the predators like that, someone asked about the voles. You mentioned voles
Yes.
skinning. Is that any kind of ongoing problem or?
It has. I'm very shocked that we haven't had a vole problem in the park because when we planted that little pollinator packet, there's a number of plants that didn't come back. We had 25 plants that was put in actually the year, I guess it was 2020, and none of the asters came back, and there were holes in the ground where they were. And then I thought, oh, they're probably gonna. I know because we have such a big problem with the baptisia in our property because of voles, but not the, I don't know. I'm wondering if because it's planted densely, there's so much root competition down there, and maybe some of the roots they don't like the hyssop is the bone, not hyssop, the boneset is
Yeah,
planted all around the latris, and
the, the vole.
maybe that's inhibiting the voles. I don't know.
But anything particular to deter them, they just haven't shown up.
Right, right, right. It may just be some of the plants. They don't like some of the plants that are around some of the plants that they do like.
So, somebody asked about like how did you prepare the site before you planted? Did you amend the soil, till it? Any?
No, no, all these plants like really lean soil, so we didn't, I mean, it's not great soil there. It was farmed at one time, but it doesn't seem like a very fertile soil at all. There's lots of gravel in it, so I don't know why the gravel was there. It's not great soil. And so all we did was did we take out just the cardboard, put the cardboard right on top of what was the grass. It wasn't really grass, whatever was growing there. And then the mulch on top of that was a thick layer of mulch. But then after we did that, the next spring we found out that there was some Bermuda grass in there, and we had to go back down through some of the cardboard and the mulch to pull out the Bermuda grass. But we were pretty good at getting that out. There's just some that's creeping in around the edges, but there's none in the interior anymore. So we really did nothing to amend the soil other than adding some mulch, and we never had to re-add mulch because the gardens really filled in quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the benefits of native plants that you don't need super rich, fancy soil. Uh,
Right.
although, like with the Miyawaki forests, they definitely prep the soil, but that's a different
Different.
kind of process.
Right.
Uh, uh, People complimenting your photos and saying like, we take pictures of our gardens and they just never do the garden justice, but your photos came out really well. Do you
Yeah,
use anything
thank you.
special techniques or?
No, well, I do have a good camera, and it's a very photogenic garden. I mean, my cell phone pictures have turned out really pretty well too, but I do have a Nikon D780 with a zoom lens, 28 to 300 millimeter zoom lens. So a lot of the pictures were from that camera, though a few were from my cell phone.
I find a lot of times it's the angle of the light, you know,
Mhm.
got to catch the right light and it really shows the plants in their glory.
Yeah, I try to take pictures when actually the sun's not out full, when
Yeah.
there's some cloud cover.
So do somebody mentioned like, so do the seeds scatter new plants? And so you talked a bit about the things, the self-seeding, and you had some interesting, like you grew your own cultivars with some crosses.
Really
So
do.
things do happen out there, right?
Yep, yep.
It's pretty good. Yeah. The and you didn't talk too much that you needed to weed very much.
Yeah, the last 2 years there actually hasn't been a lot of weeding. Most of our volunteers we've been sending to other projects we're working on, and because the garden's so filled in, so I think more of my weeding was actually pulling out some of the things that we planted that had spread too much. Volunteers of plants that we had put in. I mean, some weeds do come up, but not many in the interior of the garden because it is so filled in. I mean, occasionally there is like mugwort in that park, but only a couple times have I had to pull maybe one little seedling of mugwort, and it's usually like near the edge. So we do have to do some weeding for sure, and then definitely along the edges more weeding. But during the height of the growing season, it's, more of the weeding maybe is in the spring, but I've been able to keep it weeded with maybe just an hour a week, no more through most of the growing season.
Yeah, and to go off of that, somebody asked like, how many volunteers do you have working on this garden besides?
Well, there's lots of projects going in the park, so we always need more. You never have enough volunteers. And
But you're saying the weeding is not that
The,
onerous.
the wheat, right. This garden has really not needed a lot of volunteers except for maybe the first 2 years. We've really been able to cut back on volunteers for this and put the volunteers in other parts of the garden. So other parts of the park. Right, right.
Uh, Deb asked, like, how long before you planted through the cardboard? You probably put the mulch right on the cardboard and
Yeah,
then
we
planting.
put the cardboard down in the fall of 2021, and then the mulch, thick mulch on top of that, and then the next spring, May, we went through the cardboard was still there underneath, the mulch, so we had to dig in and create these, like I said, it was almost like digging, having craters where you planted inside because the mulch was pretty thick.
You overwintered it
Yeah, yeah, it overwintered, right,
and planted in the spring.
right.
Good, good. Let's see. Okay, so you just talked about the cardboard. Uh, Watering. You said you don't do a lot of watering, right?
Right. Yeah, it really hasn't. It's only a few. Occasionally, the purple coneflower has needed some supplemental water. If we've had an extreme drought and I see it starting to wilt because it is a public garden, we want it to continue to look good. So there is a source of water there, but we hardly ever use it for that garden. It's used for planting in other parts of the park and when we put anything new in this garden. And like as I said, we lost the bee balm because of the drought. I was supplement. I did have to water that some, but like the asters, I have never had to water. The goldenrod, I've never had to water. The euphorbia corrallata, this flowering spurge, I've never had to water. A
It's
lot
pretty.
of it, I really never had to water.
Yeah, it's
In my
pretty.
property, I grow all these on my property and I never water my native plants.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because I remember last year we had that 4 week period with no rain, and
Right, yes.
that's pretty cool. Let's see. Pretty much covering it. Somebody asked, did you do research on companion plantings? And
Yes, I did. I did that winter. I did a lot of reading. And previously, I'd visited a lot of gardens, but I used the New Moon website a lot they have really good information on plants and companion plants for plants. So I use that website a lot. And then also my experience from growing things in my yard.
yeah, that's a whole other story. Um, Lisa asked, what trees did you choose for the soft landings project?
Okay, we have, I said there was an oak and there's some river birch. And we also, there's red buds. And there's also it was a white oak we have in the one bed. So it's a couple river birches, a white oak, and there's Salem oak. It's a seedling from oak that was in Salem that eventually fell over, I guess. Anyway, it was 500 years old, and we have a seedling of that, and that's a soft landing bed. And there's dogwood also.
Um,
There's many other trees in the park that we want to put soft landings under. We just haven't gotten to them yet. Future projects.
Frida asks about lyre leaf sage and blue mist flower. Uh,
Oh, we do have, that's one thing I didn't mention. We do have a lyre leaf sage in the garden. It's doing great. It's a great ground cover. And I realized I didn't have any good photos of it, so I didn't include it, but that is something we planted originally. I thought about putting blue mist flower in, and we did put it in the restoration area. I decided against putting in this garden because it was supposed to be aggressive, but that it might have done fine because some other things I thought were aggressive weren't. And actually, I've had it in my yard and it hasn't, it often doesn't last, so I have to replant it. But I did think about putting blue mist flower in, but I didn't. That would have been a good one to include, but I didn't.
yeah, it's pretty amazing how your garden it maintains. I have areas that like have completely been taken over by one particular species that self seeds, rhizomes,
Yeah.
takes
Well, yeah.
everything you've selected is
Yeah.
keep.
Well, we have to do some management. Like I said, the asters, the aromatic aster really reseeds a lot, and so does the smooth blue aster. So, we do definitely have to do management. So more of my weeding now is trying to remove some of the more aggressive ones so that we can keep the other species in the garden. But then I usually give them away to, volunteers, which they appreciate.
Do you have any particular resource you can recommend for the companion planting research you did?
New Moon Nursery, which is a wholesale nursery. They have a great website and information on every plant, and every plant they have suggestions for companion plants for.
Oh,
And I use that quite a lot.
very nice. Okay, I think.
Hey, Mike, could we repeat the address one more time for folks?
Oh, the website, you mean? Oh, the address of the park?
Yeah, the
Park.
link,
Oh,
Google.
or the link to the QR code.
The park, the park address.
Oh, yeah, it's 49, it's 49 Democrat Road, but Google Maps will recognize it as Mickleton Park in Mickleton. But Apple Maps, you have to put in the address of 49 Democrat Road, Mickleton. And it's really, it's only like 2 miles from exit 16 off 295.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat again, the Google link. Okay. Well, this was a great presentation, Lucy, and
Okay. Thank you. It was fun.
forward to year 5 and 6.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Lucy. That was a great presentation.
Okay, welcome.
Night, everybody, and we'll
Night.
see you next year.
Night.
Bye.